Brock here from Roger Gardening. Just been outside and been asked a question by someone walking past my Japanese garden to say, how did I make it look so Japanese? And I realised actually there's not much information out there on just how you make a garden look particularly Japanese. And the main reason is that people don't actually understand the concept of the scalene triangle. Now you're looking at me thinking, I went to school years ago, this isn't something that I know a lot about or care a lot about, but it's absolutely essential to the Japanese garden. In Japan, a Japanese garden is designed to mimic nature. And when we look in nature, we look all around ourselves. In a flower, for example, you'll see perfect symmetry in something like a daisy. However, if you were to look out on a view, it's very rare, if ever, that you'll see any form of symmetry in nature. In fact, you won't see the nice right angles that you'll get in lots of Western gardens. And as a result, the Japanese have focused on this particular characteristics of landscapes, and when trying to recreate landscapes they make sure and spend a lot of time when they're thinking about designing their garden to make sure that there is pure asymmetry rather than symmetry within their gardens. Now, the best way to describe this to you and the best way to explain how you do it in your own garden is it's all about looking for something called a scalene triangle. Now, let's go back to school very quickly and I'll explain what that means. Here we have the traditional right angle triangle. You may remember it from school. Huge problem with a right angle triangle. This creates symmetry. It creates straight lines. How do I mean? Let's put one on top of it. There you have symmetry. You have right angles. In nature, these rarely occur, and therefore we want to avoid them. However, consider a traditional Western garden where you're taught to have a herbaceous border, for example, in a big stately home. They'll often say, plant tall trees and shrubs at the back, small ones in here, and the low flowers at the front. Right? That creates that lovely right angle, that lovely symmetry that often people want in Western gardens. You do not, however, want any of these if you want to create a garden that looks Japanese. The second type of triangle you often see, if you remember back at school, is one where two sides are identical in length, and then you have a shorter side here. This is known as an isosceles triangle. Once again, not something you see very often in nature, and not something that you want in a Japanese garden. Think of the traditional clipped cones of yew that you will get in a very stately home garden, often symmetrically down your driveway, etc. Right? Again, not something you will ever see in a Japanese garden. What you want in a Japanese garden is something called the scalene triangle. This has three completely different lengths for their sides and three completely different angles. Yeah? By finding the scalene triangles in everything that you do, you will get a Japanese garden, or the creation of a Japanese garden. The most obvious example and the famous example of this is when in Zen gardens you're placing rocks, for example. Right? Never will you see from above or from the front either of these shapes, right, in the rock placement. If you think about it, from above it's not as easy to see, but when you look at it from the front, a Japanese garden might have a tall rock here, it may have a small rock here. But in order to create the scalene triangle, it will never place a rock just here, because that would create your right angle triangle. It would also never try and place a rock up here where it was perfect, right? They would most likely place one here. That straight away creates something more Japanese looking. Why? You have three separate lengths, three separate angles. It's a scalene triangle. Even more obvious to many people, although they don't realize it, is when you're actually looking at a tree that's been shaped, or a bonsai tree in particular has been shaped. Very often they're looking for asymmetry, and what they're actually looking for is scalene triangles in the areas around the branches. Right? I'm going to draw a very, very crude example of this, but if you take a traditional drawing of a tree that a child may draw, which may do this, what you've actually got under here, effectively, are right angle triangles. You would never see a bonsai really, or a Japanese garden tree, Niwaki, pruned or clipped that look like that. It just doesn't happen, and that doesn't look very Japanese to the eye. What does look Japanese to the eye, and what you do often see, is if you once again were to create those scalene triangles here, once again, if you imagine this is the trunk and these are the branches, that is something that you will have often seen. You know, we may go this way to create another scalene triangle. That trunk shape, if you think about it, is something that you've probably seen in the shape of a Japanese trunk and branches. And again, it's because they're once again looking for those scalene triangles. You don't want the right angle, you don't want the isosceles. Anyway, I will go into more detail at some point about that, but I just wanted to give a quick kind of summary as to if you're looking to make your garden look more Japanese, or even an area in your garden look more Japanese, remember, scalene triangles, they're essential.